How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
So yeah, we spoke with Tony. There were a few questions that we thought folks might be interested, but it may be good to kind of flip the script a little bit and see what kinds of things do you all want to hear about, and what kinds of things around, whether it's air quality, tree canopy, or what the city is doing, that you may want to know about that can kind of kick things off. So
I want to know what is in our air, for one, like what specific particulate matter or gases or whatever are we most worried about right now?
well, we're most worried about particulate matter that's in that PM 2.5 range. And why that's important is because it's the particulate matter that is really small that gets past all of our nasal passages and the cilia in our lung areas that then get into our bodies. And once it gets into our bodies, that's where we believe that havoc starts. So things like heart disease, some forms of cancer, asthma, especially in kids, is then directly correlated to particulate matter. So we monitor that, and that's where CleanAIRE NC got its start, really with using purple air particulate matter monitors in communities, especially like the historic West End, which is where we got our original start, which we then used and deployed through our Climate Ambassador program. And once we started collecting the data, we started working with the county to locate an EPA monitor here, which gives us a much more comprehensive view of what is happening from a particulate matter standpoint. But there's a variety of things that are in it, and diesel emissions and emissions from transportation are some of the primary things that make up particulate matter. Dust and ozone are the other components that make it up. So anytime you see construction or things of that nature where there's dust that gets kicked up, you can rest assured that that's part of particulate matter that gets breathed in. It's usually associated with things that we talked about Mark Marietta and the historic West End. That's another area where just in the process of doing mine work, where trucks receive a lot of aggregate stuff that gets moved around, it then gets out on the city streets, and that dust is what gets kicked up. So that's what we're mainly concerned about, is the emissions that are in and around highways, the industrial areas, and then the naturally occurring stuff like ozone. Right.
Hello. I've got two questions. The first question is, can you tell us who you individually are and why you're passionate about what you do? I've had the good fortune of hearing you guys speak, and there's nothing but passion that comes through. So just curious to know where that comes from. And then the second question is leaning into what Sarah mentioned in her opening about how underserved communities are particularly vulnerable to the implications of climate change. So if we can address those two, I would appreciate it.
I'll kick it off, at least with the first question, and then maybe we do that and talk about the next one. My background, are there any students in the room? I know there might be a couple, yeah. So I was an English major, focusing on contemporary fiction, which has a lot of job opportunities.
Flush.
Yeah. But I grew up in Pennsylvania, and so what I found myself doing after college was doing something that really mattered to my community. So in Pennsylvania, there's many coal-fired power plants, and the impacts of those are very real. Jeff talked a little bit about the asthma rates, and of course the folks who live closest to most of these plants are Black and brown communities. In Pennsylvania are lower income communities. And so because I'm a Pennsylvania girl, and my English major wasn't taking me too many places immediately after college, I got involved in campaign work and just knocking on doors and talking to people about this real issue, which was at the time the current administration, and this is a long time ago, about 20 years past college here, but was going to overturn the Clean Air Act. And so there would be actually more opportunity for even more emissions at that time. And so just trying to talk to people across party lines about the real health impacts of people that they love and know. And that just really spoke to me, not only because, you know, it was my community, my larger community, but also because I really realized that like people can have such a big influence on decision makers. So fast forward years of doing some of that work, and I decided that working in local government was just another way from a different perspective to be close to addressing the issues that matter most to folks. And but really my passion, and I have two kids, and I was talking to my summer intern, actually one of Jeffrey, and I shared. We had a overachieving intern last summer, and I was talking to her father, and he said to me, if you have children or love children, and probably you don't have children, you probably have young people in your life that you love, then you must be hopeful about the future. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so I'm in this work because I am hopeful about the future. And I got into it because I do believe that people can make a difference. And I'm in this really amazing, I have the best job ever role, although challenges abound. Because I really feel that government has there's a legacy and history of government dividing communities and creating some of the challenges that we're talking about here today, specifically around you know, inequities and history of institutional racism that's embedded in our community and others. But I also believe it can be transformational if we work together with other folks. So that's why I'm excited to do this type of work.
I love everything you said. I want to go after you. I'm Jane Singleton Myers, Executive Director for TreesCharlotte, a little over 3 years now. My background's a little different. I was corporate America mostly for 18 years in Charlotte, and I guess got to 40 and was like, what do I really want to be when I grow up? And it was something more impactful in the community. And I started with an executive director role with First Tee Greater Charlotte, because I was a volunteer there. And I love their mission of changing children's mind. I believe the children are our future. I won't sing it, but you have to. I wish I could, but in the shower when nobody else can hear me. But yeah, I believe in children and what they can do for us, and it's I have two amazing stepchildren, so it's really wonderful to see the things that they're interested in and caring about. But I did my time, I did like 5 years there, almost 5 years, and I loved it, but I was ready to do something different, and came over to TreesCharlotte after a little while and loved it. I landed here because in large part, I had never heard of it and kind of got recruited for it. And I would say, what I always tell people is I used to travel a lot for Bank of America, and everywhere I'd go around the country, people would say, oh, you're from Charlotte, the city with all the trees. And not just note that, but admire that. And like that, it's so incredible how green it is. And you think about when you fly in or fly out of, if you've ever been fortunate to do that, fly out of our city, it really is truly staggering to see our amazing canopies of coverage. And I wanted to be a part of preserving that for Charlotte, because it's really so much about the trees for me, because I grew up being outdoors and a lot. I was a tomboy, still am to a degree. Ironically, my dad was in the lumber business. Our family business was the lumber business. So we say wood is good in our family, but I think that did help instill. That did help. That did help instill a sense of because it's a crop in the lumber business, right? And so they plant 6 and 7 trees for every one they cut down. And that was kind of the way he always positioned it to me growing up. So a sense of responsibility to our environment and camping and all those things we did growing up as a family. And that was so important to me. But again, I think a lot of it was the love of Charlotte. and wanting to preserve that for our city and really getting in and I've learned so much in 3 years. I just thought trees were cool and I knew they cleaned our air, but they do everything. They're nature's miracles. I mean, I almost think sometimes about when I talk to people, like, name something and I can probably tell you a study that trees address, whether it's traffic, speeding, crime in communities, ADHD symptoms. I mean, it goes on and on. The amazing ways that they help us, but obviously cleaning our air. We usually joke, like, why do you do what you do? Because I like breathing. So it's so important. And I think, some of the things that I've enjoyed most about making an impact is this relationship with the city, how we've really grown that partnership over the past 3 years, and getting into more of the planning and intentionality about how we're going to continue to preserve and hopefully grow our urban forests, where I think we all kind of had a little bit of concern before. It now feels more attainable as we continue to work together. And, I think back to the children piece, that's a Native American proverb of our children don't inherit we don't inherit the earth, we borrow it from our children. We don't inherit the earth, we borrow it from our children. And when you think about that, and the fact that it's been around for a very long time, because when I've Googled it, it even goes back, it's like a bunch of different cultures have a version of that African proverb, Chinese proverb. So it's kind of been around our world for a very long time. And if we actually embraced that, it would really be such a better place in every regard, but certainly in the way we care for our communities, and people in our communities. So, but yeah, that's my little introduction.
So we are going through a question that was raised, so.
Very good. Well, I
Tony?
apologize to the panel and to the audience for running late this morning. I'm Tony Mecia with the Charlotte Ledger, the moderator, but it seems like it got off to a self-moderated start, and I appreciate it. And have you all gone down and talked a little bit about who you are and what your organizations are doing, working on? You're left. Okay, go ahead and go.
So like Jane, I think I started out in corporate America. I started out as a warehouse person at Motorola to help put myself through undergrad. Grew up in Chicago in a red line community on the south side, and worked my way through school, and then I took my first corporate job with Motorola in the reclamation department. So we made some semiconductors, and it was really my first inroad into what sustainability was before it was actually a thing. I was responsible for reclaiming raw material that had been either through poor quality products or return products or damaged. So all the precious metals and rare earths would be put on barges, and I was responsible for working logistics. So that was my first inroad into what sustainability was and reusing materials. Motorola sent me to grad school, and then that led to my second stop that I spent 10 years at Motorola. I spent 10 years at FedEx, which was my next stop, and that's when the seed got planted that I was in marketing, and we gave a presentation that talked about FedEx burns more fuel than any other airline, with the exception of the U.S. Air Force. And that kind of planted a seed in my mind, because I said, they're using that much Jet A. What is that doing to the environment?
Were they proud of that when they made that?
They were proud of it, very proud of it. And at the time, it became an issue. And the chairman and founder of FedEx loved to buy airplanes. And I was part of a team, and he wanted to buy the A380. If anybody knows what the A380 is, it's a huge super jumbo jet that had 3 floors, 4 engines. And the footprint from a carbon standpoint, and the ability to actually process materials from the flight back onto the plane, would have sent our carbon footprint up. So I was on Team Boeing for transitioning to twin engine planes primarily. They had the MD-11 and MD-10s, which were three engines. And so my goal at that time was to try to get FedEx to reduce the fuel burn. But as things go, you chase title and money, or for money and title, and I left and came here to Tyco, and that's where the next part of my journey in terms of understanding sustainability came from. I ran the product team, and in Europe, you have to think of end of life for everything that you manufacture. So the manufacturer of those goods in Europe are responsible for when a product ends its life, you have to then be willing to take it back from the customer to then recycle. So I was responsible for implementing that in our manufacturing facilities in Europe. And so that was the next seed that was planted. Got recruited to go to, of all things, a pest control company, and didn't think that I would ever be anywhere like that, but as a marketer, I always believed that you can market anything. But I became more aware of the environment there because of the impact of pesticides on insects. And, you know, the granularity of what that means in terms of bee populations and other pollinators. We had a department that did research on green pest control, and luckily, most of the methods that the organization was trying to deploy was trying to reduce chemical use in the pesticide area. But it still didn't speak to me, and my last stop in corporate America was with online lifestyle and commercial vehicle provider, and the amount of energy that organization used was crazy. It became prevalent and known about how much was happening because of the blockchain, and we started researching, and the organization I was working at was trying to find energy to manage more of their servers and more of the research and more of the things that they were trying to pull in more vehicles into their websites. And I'm like, this is crazy. So October of 2021, I was part of the Great Resignation. And I developed a self-mantra. I wanted to be on the solution side of things instead of the problem side of things. So I quit, went and got a master's certification in sustainability. I knew enough about sustainability, and so I took a year off to do that, and started looking for volunteer opportunities, and met Jessica over at CleanAIRE. She introduced me to June Blotnick, who was running CleanAIRE at the time. It was around the time of the Duke Energy, and so they knew my background in supply chain, they knew my background, so they wanted me to analyze Duke's procurement of renewable equipment, and it was crap. They didn't really have a legitimate way. It was, when you look at how you procure things and the amount of time in terms of working with suppliers, working with areas where the equipment was going to be deployed, they did not have a comprehensive plan to where this is supposed to happen in, 3-5 years. So I called BS on it, and they asked me to be a part of the Carben plan testimony in front of North Carolina Utilities Commission. And I'm thinking, okay, I guess I'll get sworn in, but they had a rally and they had a march and they had all these chants and everything. I'm like, this is kind of cool. So I decided, hey, this is where I want to be. I didn't want to be in corporate America because my last 3 years in corporate America really took a toll because, when you think about corporate social responsibility and all those things, it's kind of it's greenwashing. As a Black man in corporate America, it was very hard to be accepted, to see folks that looked like me in positions of power, making decisions. So I was like, why am I doing this? I should be doing things that are improving things for my nieces and nephews and kids, and that's how I got here. When June found out that I was interviewing with other folks, she's like, why don't you apply for my job? And so I was like, okay. And that's how I got to CleanAIRE, and it'll be 2 years in September, and it's the best decision that I ever made. So.
Well, I appreciate y'all sharing your journeys. Keep that on that. I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges. Well, I'm going to get to the solutions in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in working in this space. You all are sort of approaching this from, it's the same issue, but you're approaching it from different angles. You know, as you wake up this morning, it's a beautiful day. You go out, the air feels crisp. There's no obvious smokestacks, out on the skyline here. What are the challenges of getting people to understand the realities of the issue and to understand that there are problems that we need to work on?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So, I mean, it is interesting. We were talking about this earlier this week, but climate change is one of those, sometimes it feels like a slow burn problem if you don't face it or confronted with it in your everyday life. But it does affect you. You might not see it. Again, it doesn't affect everybody equally. And I think a lot of the issues that all communities in our communities are intersectional, right? So take, for example, you have a high energy bill. So you have a high energy bill, and why is that? Well, maybe your home is not insulated. Why is your home not insulated? Well, maybe you're a renter, and the home has been, created quickly with low quality products. So now you're paying more for your energy bill, but you're also creating a bigger problem when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. And, in North Carolina and across the country, they are highly carbon intensive. And so ultimately you're contributing to the climate and the challenges in the climate, more extreme weather patterns, which includes things like here, while we don't live in an ocean, and it's, again, not sort of always in your face because the sea level's rising, you might see more intense rain. And so more intense rain, and more people living here, more development means more non-porous surfaces, right? So you got more concrete, you got no place for the water to go. So then there could be more flooding issues. And so all of a sudden, folks who already have these other challenges, people with asthma because maybe they live near a highway. Now that it's hotter, more intense rain, more flooding issues. And so all of a sudden you start to see, okay, maybe one of these things in isolation, I didn't quite contribute to climate change. But when you start to look at how they layer on top of each other, it becomes more and more clear. And so I think one of the challenges is accessible language and making the connection. So I can totally geek out about greenhouse gas emissions and why we need renewable energy, solar panels, and those things are solutions and important topics of conversation, and I love to have them. But like for individual people just going through their life every single day, that can feel kind of disconnected from their experience. So I think the real challenge and opportunity is making those connections, meeting people where they're at, and understanding that these are highly complex, interrelated problems that there is not one single solution for. And so I would say that's a huge challenge.
Right. Jane, what about TreesCharlotte? I think there's a general understanding people like trees. We need trees. A lot of times you hear, okay, we also need things like housing. We need more housing units. There's a lot of issues, with housing costs. How do you engage people in the issue of, understanding, the need for trees? You have a lot of volunteers out planting trees. You have a lot of programs that people come and can get trees and plant them. How do you create that awareness or that urgency around the issues you're working on?
Yeah, it's important because, well, we surpassed 6,000 trees this season, which is, yeah. Kids are first in our 11, 12-year tenure, to get that many out for the community. Obviously pales in comparison at the loss, that we experience every year, but, I think raising awareness, marketing is so important. And honestly, as a nonprofit, that typically is the thing you most sacrifice because you're, pinching pennies and trying to make a dollar stretch. And it seems like a nice to have in today's world, particularly social media world, that is mission critical. And I think, you know, again, from like my first my other nonprofit experience, and you just kind of, you think about it as a nice to have. But I think that's really can be viewed as education. So we just started, we launched, National Arbor Day, our, campaign called Charlotte Without Trees. That's like Uptown without bankers, you know, just trying to get people to think, or, barbecue without the slaw. Its focus is to try to get people in a clever, like engaging way, like a non-abrasive way, to think about their trees differently. And how I think people say a lot, oh, people love trees. I think people love trees on other people's property, you know, 'cause we hear all the time, and we hear all the time, like, you know, like, oh, I'm scared this tree's gonna fall on my house. And I understand that real fear, because you need to help maintain an urban tree. It's not like it can do whatever it's gonna do in the forest, right? But, yeah, so I, you know, that is, something that I think we're trying to raise awareness around, is, you know, pull the fear away from the trees, raise the emphasis in education. We're doing this like guerrilla tree wrap campaign, where we're putting tree wraps out in the community. You'll hopefully see them at parks and other things, but that's our education component of this campaign. So things like, and, you know, trees reduce stress, feel better, or trees improve work productivity, feel free to work from here. Because there's a study that says that, if you can see trees from where you work, there's 25% less sick days. Yeah, so I mean,
So it sounds like it's about trying to connect it to people and their lives, and not just this abstract notion of their tree. We cover a lot of growth and development issues, and the time we hear the most loudly about trees is when a developer wants to build something on the adjacent parcel. They go, well, what about, I love waking up in the morning and drinking my coffee and looking at the trees and the squirrels. And it's like, well, you know, then it affects them, right? They understand it if there's that tangible connection. So it's about trying to create those connections, you think?
yeah, and it's complicated because it's easy to see that big loss, the 5 acres or 15 acres that are clear cut, and then people underestimate their 5 and 10 trees that they take down on their property.
Mhm.
And that is a significant source of loss, is redevelopment. So when folks do things on their own property, or you see that a lot around, people buy a little ranch and then tear it down and you build up to the setback lines, and they take out all the trees, and you think, oh, well, that's just 3 and 5 and 10 trees, but it has an accumulative effect. So the incremental impact is significant as well. So not to underestimate the impact of big growth, but I love what you were saying about it's not one thing. And I know I'm here representing the one thing we can do for, you know, we always say, why buy, this is one of our tree wraps, but why buy an air purifier if you can plant one?
Well, why buy an air conditioner if you
Can right tree, right place,
Yeah.
cool your house.
Yeah.
There's so many things like that, but it's hard to balance all the different things. So, you know, where housing is needed, and we partner because we see that we want to help be a part of everything. We want to partner with Sustain Charlotte and what they're doing, and all our other, you know, CleanAIRE and C and all of our other partners, and try and you know, the rising tides lift all boats. And I think that's what we want to focus on to try to tackle all of this, but getting trees out of the white noise or the background and into the forefront of people's thinking.
Jeff, what about you? CleanAIRE, NC, you know, I think again, people in the abstract recognize we all want clean air, right?
Mhm.
But people don't necessarily feel engaged on that issue all the time.
Yeah.
How do you engage them?
It's a challenge, right? Because Jane talked about things that are tangible. Water is tangible. The trees are tangible. You see them, you can touch them. The air is a kind of an intangible commodity. And I think when you couple that with where air pollution and climate change impacts people, that's our challenge, is how do you shed light on the impact of an underserved, which are Black, Brown, Indigenous communities that historically have been given a raw deal. Princeville, North Carolina, as an example, from the time when the settlers came here, was an area that was selected for slaves to inherit, and became a racial topography issue because they were given low-lying areas. Well, that area of North Carolina floods when there's a sprinkle. And so, you know, Black communities have historically lived in places that have always been impacted. And so the challenge there is first when you deal with community, and that's why, I think CleanAIRE NC has created a really foundational motto in terms of we start with a fact base through our community science program by involving community to become air keepers. And an air keeper means you hang a monitor on your home if you're living in, for example, the historic West End, so that you can monitor the air quality in that area. And once you have that fact base, our environmental justice programs work with community to understand and make sure that they get educated first and foremost about cumulative impacts of issues like pollution. We follow the social determinants of health in terms of access to clean water, clean air, food, medical, a good paying job, mobility, right? Those are all the things that everybody should have a God-given right to enjoy. So we educate folks. We tell them about the health impacts through our health programs. We also then teach folks how to advocate, right? Because if you don't give folks the voice to be able to create change, they're going to continue to suffer. And so that's our biggest challenge, is how do we take our programs and work across the state with all of the issues that are impacting, and whether you are in Western North Carolina and you're dealing with things there, or in the eastern part where North Carolina is probably the leading hog and poultry producer in the world. And Smithfield Farms is operating in Sampson, Duplin, Bladen counties. And when you consider how they do their animal agriculture and the impact to communities, the spraying of hog feces and urine on crops that we all consume, and on the homes of people that live there, where people suffer from rare forms of cancer. Those things have to be brought to light in terms of what that looks like. And the challenge there obviously is the legislative process and our General Assembly, and under the guise of development. So, sustainability is really about finding solutions to common problems. And so there's a different way that they should be doing things. And that's the big challenge for us, is how do we start with that fact base, educate the population, get that critical mass of participation to then use the legislative process, whether it's through enforcing, permitting through clean air infractions, or participating in the energy process through North Carolina Utilities Commission. But it takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes, we have to be intentional. Sarah and I were in a session on Thursday, and we think when we use words like legacy, pollution, and energy burden, that those are common nomenclature items. But for a community that is not aware of those things, we have to take the time to provide that level of education. But I say it's a challenge, but it's what we have decided and need to do. So we take pleasure in that.
So on these issues that you all are working on, I mean, there are a variety of different solutions, and there's no, silver bullet, there's no single bullet that's going to solve these. But how much of the solution is a political solution, getting the attention of policymakers, or working with, people on at the grassroots level to advocate for policy, versus things that can be done? I mean, there are a lot of frustrations, and can be a very difficult process. How much is this political solution versus how much are your organizations able to do just sort of working with people outside of that? If that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
Both, I mean, policy is a huge part of it. Yeah. And I mean, if you could talk about pretty much every single thing that we've touched on, and there's a policy aspect to it. So the level to which homes or multifamily apartments are built, and how energy efficient they are, and how much energy they use, which contributes to greenhouse gases and contributes to people's energy burden. There's a housing code, and there's a standard, and in North Carolina that standard is well below most states, and so that's a policy issue. But that doesn't mean there aren't other solutions that we can implement. But it's gotta be a yes, and, right, so, and I'll just give some examples of some of the policy solutions that I think are really interesting. There's, through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Biden administration, for example, even as a city, we're getting 30% back on every single clean energy project that we put into the ground. So, for every electric vehicle charger, for every solar project, for, building our buildings using geothermal energy, for every electric vehicle we buy, we're getting a percentage back. And that is, and that enables more work to be done, because it's understanding that there may be a premium right now on some of these solutions. So how do you step into that gap? And many of those types of opportunities are available to individuals. Sometimes it may still not be enough. But I think it is a yes, and then it's also the everyday things that we do. So are you washing your watch with cold water when you can instead of hot water? That saves a ton of energy. And that doesn't involve getting a new energy efficient appliance, right? So it's a yes.
Anybody else want?
When I started in this role, I heard a lot, like, why should we give to TreesCharlotte or support TreesCharlotte? That's the city's responsibility to care for our trees. And one of the things we set out to do, I wanted to make sure I raised awareness, I learned it, but like 10% of property in Charlotte is owned by the city. It's like 15 including county, so we can't expect that to be solely a city's responsibility. And I think I love the yes and, because it all needs to happen. That's why we need to partner with CleanAIRE, we need to partner with Sustain, and we need to partner with River Keepers and Catawba Lands, all of our different partners. We are seeking to do that, even Raptor Center, right? Because raptors need trees. So I think it's, and that's why when I started, one of the things I was most proud about is how we've grown our partnership with the city, because we have this, we did the canopy assessment last fall that was released last fall in partnership with the city. We verified that with the county, so growing that relationship. And then looking at what Tim Porter, who's Chief Urban Forester, is calling TCAP, the Tree Canopy Action Plan 2.0 for now. So he's gonna lead developing that, but we'll be at the table as part of those conversations. So I think I love the yes and answer, and just wanted to jump on that as well to reiterate that, but also to raise that awareness. I mean, the city has over 200,000 street trees, and I mean, maintaining that alone is incredible. So, and expensive, right?
Thank you, taxpayers.
Exactly, like, exactly. I mean, if you've ever had to do mature tree care work, we've just started going into that with our Resiliency initiative, which I can talk about later. But that is, I mean, very cost prohibitive to do mature tree care. And when you think about the communities that were historically redlined, and you see median incomes of 35 and 45,000, you can't spend, and they have, even though it's, our newest community we're adding is Greenville, which is a 20-ish% canopy coverage. It is low, particularly compared to South Park, the Wedge, which is 55%. But that's still pretty good. Trees Pittsburgh's goal in their historically redlined communities is 7%. So I always like to tell people that, because it's still a problem and we want to grow, but we also need to care for what we have. And that always is the definition of sustainability, is caring for what we have well. So that mature tree care, where you can see, we spent on 17 homes in Revolution Park, we spent $40,000 doing mature tree care. So that's just to give you a sense of what costs are like for that, but that helps ease the burden for a family or a homeowner who can't. That's their only possession, is their home and their financial, stability. And if there's a tree that's at risk of that hasn't been cared for, might fall. It's very important to give them that sense of preservation of what they've invested in. So I'm starting. So, but anyway, I think the yes and. I'll stop.
The only thing I'd add is, it starts with us. I mean, it is a political process, but we have to actively participate in that process. So a good example that I always like to tell people of the power of the community. In historic West End, there was a developer that wanted to rezone, I don't know how many acres it was, but they wanted to take it from residential to commercial and put in another industrial manufacturing facility. Well, the community got together, downloaded the petition that any community member can do, and quickly, within a matter of a week, got over 1,000 signatures.
Mhm.
To the extent that the developer saw that as pushback, and so came to the conclusion that we need to find another location for this facility. So the political process is a little bit daunting and overwhelming because of the current climate of where we are with the General Assembly. We have to find dialogue and ways to communicate with them so that it's almost, I call it code shifting, right? In terms of, instead of saying green, infrastructure, it's development. But it really starts with people. And, we talked about a civics lesson on Thursday in terms of, people think that they just have to vote every 2 years. No, you have to vote every 2 years, and you have to be a part of that process. And that's where we all have a responsibility to take part in protecting the environment. And it's good to have organizations that are here that are doing the work, but one of the things outside of donations, outside of grants, if I could increase my volunteer coffers and members in CleanAIRE NC, we could do some things in terms of really pushing the needle on the political side of things.
The question I had on the political side, we talk a lot about policymakers, and that's certainly important, the General Assembly and here at the local level, City Council, County Commission, but there are also, staff that are working on the issues. What is that? I mean, obviously some of these things need to be, there need to be big changes or policy changes that only legislators or elected officials can do. But there are a lot of things that staff can do and that administrative departments can do.
True.
And a lot of times I think sometimes, write to your, state house representative and, email them. That's good. But there's a lot that people can do, I think, at the some of those levels that don't get a lot of exposure. Do you have much experience, y'all, working with some of those, either, local government or staff, in Raleigh, or staff here locally?
If I wanted to jump in, I was gonna tack this on to the last question too. What I was two things, I was so surprised to learn, because I always felt like reaching out to our city council people was putting upon them, right? Like I was like, oh, I don't want to bother them. I'm concerned and they'll figure it out, and I thought that they would feel put upon their burden, and especially coming into this role, I was concerned about asking our followers or our TreesCharlotte people to reach out to them. Every time I meet with a city council rep, they would say, we need you to raise awareness.
Yes.
We need your people to call us and tell us
Yes.
if it's that important. Like this has to, we can't know what to prioritize if we're not hearing from our constituency. And that has stuck with me so much, because I think, it's really easy to think about, well, I voted and then I'll trust. And I think from a local level, because we don't really get into state stuff yet, but we've really started to embrace that as a nonprofit, and are adding a new program called Tree Speakers, which will be comprised of some of our volunteers, but to get more of that present city council members and county commissioner meetings.
If I could add to that, one of the things I talk to city council and county commissioners a lot. One twist on that is they want to hear from people, and they'll say they want to hear from people, but they don't want the same email. They don't want the same, hey, cut and paste this and send it to your city council member. That's, I think, viewed as not as authentic. But if you have a whole bunch of people who are really fired up about something, go ahead and use that voice, make it your voice and say what's at stake. And they might not always respond. They do read, most of them, I think they do read the emails, and they know what's coming in, and they know what's a hot topic.
No, we work at all levels, and including agency levels, because it is important. And, like Jane said, and to your point, we've started creating templates that can be adapted by people to create comments, right? We give them thought starters with what the issues are. but they have the ability to kind of complete the template on their own. So those things do work. And participating in that process, you know, I always get a friendly email from a friend that works at the city and say, hey, could you do some support here?
Mhm.
And so we do. At the state level, it's a little bit different, right? And that's where Mecklenburg County has this perception at the General Assembly that we're coming in with like a sawed-off shotgun. And so they kind of like, well, we don't really want to listen to these guys because they're going to be bleeding heart liberals and they're going to be talking about, you know, tree hugging and that kind of thing. But the reality is they still have to hear, and we have to present our arguments in a way that will resonate. And so we've taken a lot of guidance from our partners, especially folks like the River Keepers, where they have a really strong coalition that navigates the state capitol and knows, you know, the type of tone that will resonate. So you have to do that. I think the other level that we work at quite a bit is at the agency level, whether it's at the federal level with the EPA or with DEQ and DAQ, right? Because DEQ handles all of the permitting for things that are air related, right? So if there's an air permit, you have to get DEQ approval. There's things that they don't know in terms of they're working with a business that comes to them and is requesting a permit. Oftentimes those public listening sessions, again, this is a public service announcement. Anytime there's a public hearing on air permitting, if it's in your area, you should participate. You should read the notes in terms of it's usually a 2-page introduction that talks about what permit is being requested and the impact on community. That is where the process of participating at the community level is most important, because DEQ is only going to be listening to the business and making the assessment on the hazards of what that looks like. So we influence and try to work with our partners at DEQ, and that's where we need help with public.
We'll get to questions in 1 second. I do want to go down the line. Last question, putting you on the spot a little bit. One piece of advice if people want to get engaged on this issue and what they can do. Who wants to start?
Oh, well, for TreesCharlotte, our campaign that I mentioned earlier, Charlotte Without Trees, is call to action is a pledge. So the pledges there's 6 different pledges, and it's designed so that it can reach multiple, like different, whatever you might be, where you might be coming from, your station in life. So if you're a homeowner, if you're a renter, if you're a student, and then getting into some businesses as well. So you can take the pledge and it's just one thing, 6 or so items that you can do that will help our canopy. And you'll learn a lot too. There's a lot of educational supportive material tied to it. So that would be my TreesCharlotte's position.
Take a moment of personal privilege to say that we are updating our strategic energy action plan. That is the city's main climate action plan to address greenhouse gas emissions. And we really, really want to hear from you. And this plan will only be as good as the inputs into it. The last plan did not, it was 5 years ago. So I don't think we said the word climate change in the plan. Things have changed, and we want to more thoroughly about equity throughout the entirety of the plan. And so in order to do that in a way that is authentic to the community, please participate, and there'll be more information coming out and later on this summer about how you can do that. So we'd love to have your voices on it.
Definitely. Quick way people can get involved.
Due Carben plan is over, the hearings are done, but there's still work to be done. So come to our website, you can look at the information. There's 2 key hearings that are happening, Marshall and Roxborough. Duke is looking to add more fossil fuel infrastructure that directly impacts everybody's pocketbooks in this room. So I would just encourage people to get more involved in the entire process. They're reviewing the CPRP again. And that is the process of how they're instructed to be working towards a cleaner energy production model. So that's where I think folks need to, across North Carolina, become more aware, because if Duke does not convert to a cleaner model, Sarah never hits her CEAP goals, And we don't get to net zero by 2050.
All right, thanks. We'll get to your questions. You have one up here?
DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality?
Yes.
Okay.
In the blue, yeah.
With regard to, if I did attend, a justice hearing, recently. And the big issue was that DEQ doesn't look at that cumulative effect.
No.
So what is your take on whether or not they're gonna hear that that's critical? And that they need to start doing that.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge, right? And so that's where I look at it as part of my responsibility is meeting with folks like Mike Abrazinski to impress upon him that, hey, we have to start looking at cumulative impact. So Virginia Guidry, who is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, she is doing research on how they can incorporate that into their permitting process, but it's going to take a long time. So I think the big thing is the legislative process and the political atmosphere right now. I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but I think the big thing is they have to hear from people as well. So.
Right, yeah, behind you, in the coat.
So I have a question more on the legal standpoint about natural gas. So thinking about the legal case of City of Berkeley versus the California Restaurant Association. The City of Berkeley was trying to put bans on new natural gas infrastructure. I know they're still kind of having some ongoing debates. It got all the way to the federal level, but Charlotte also tried to look for the same goals. We talked about all the new building that's going on. Are we also looking to kind of sort of put a ban on natural gas infrastructure here?
I can take that. So, from a city staff perspective, one of the things that we're doing is truly working to lead by example. So to do what we can as an organization to show what is possible. So this year, the city adopted a new sustainable facilities policy, which means all new buildings will be built all electric. So I'm using language very thoughtfully. There's all electric, and then there's no new natural gas. And all electric is maybe not as I don't know what the right word is, like a trigger for folks, but it is doing the same thing. And so it kind of gets back to sort of how are we using language and being thoughtful about who is in power and in decision-making influence. And so the city is doing that with our own buildings. But how do we get the community to do it? Well, in our state, based on the Dillon's rule versus home rule, we don't have the ability to make that type of a ordinance. And clearly, even in California, that's being legally challenged. And so I think, at least for where we are right now, our objective is to figure out what are those right carrots to incent our partners who have strong sustainability objectives in the community who are developing things to do the same thing we're doing. And so over the next couple of years here, we'll be looking at how can we incent the community to follow our policy that we're doing for our own buildings. But again, that is just a function of sort of the political landscape, not only just here in North Carolina, but across the country. So we don't have any plans to do a no new natural gas ordinance. Some of the record show, but there are lots of ways that we can be really thoughtful about making a difference as you know, this is the future. Like the future is clean. The future, it has to be, right? So, but we can't wait until the tides turn. Let's see what we can do now.
Sure.
Sorry, I can go in the corner.
It's been a long time. I think I've seen you all do great work over the years, so really appreciate that. And Sarah, the climate action plan, just remind us what the standards are for that and how you got to the 2030 goals and how you're doing, reaching them, short term and long term. And then, of course, for Jane, I've got a question. You have a lot of partners, but who are you fighting against? And
Pump up the conflict here.
Yeah.
Who are you not fighting against?
So I'll keep this brief. So, we have two goals. One is to power our buildings and our fleet by zero carbon sources by 2030. Incredibly ambitious, even in 2018, when it was adopted, still incredibly ambitious. So what that means for us, is again, sort of back to the how are we leading by example and showing and being on the forefront in our community. And so on the building side of things right now, we're actually within striking distance of our goal. Can't claim victory yet, but we have about 20% of the way to go with a big program that we entered into with Duke Energy and Cypress Creek Renewables. We're helping to support building an 80 megawatt solar farm, which is about 45 minutes away. So it has local air quality benefits, local workforce benefits, and with that big action, we offset all of our electricity use in our buildings, and so now we need to also look at our natural gas, to your point. And then on the fleet side of things, that is a much bigger challenge. It's all related. So Duke Energy's grid, even powering our electric vehicles, it's not a zero carbon game at this time. But with electrification, we have lots of really big vehicles, and so our objective is to lower that number and look for ways to step into the gap. And then 2050 goal, as Jeff gave a shout out to, which is really our community-wide goal. How do we become net zero by 2050? As we update our strategic energy action plan, we'll be resetting science-based targets and looking for inter-targets specifically around things like community-wide renewable energy, and how we can meet those objectives.
So thank you for your question. I think it's interesting because you really have to approach it from, I don't want to say a shell game, but there's going to be trade-offs in everything. Like I hear solar farm and I go, how many trees can I get cut down for that? Or one of the examples, Shannon from CleanAIRE and I talked about was there, I don't know if you've heard about, there's the development that's being fought over because of the Eagles out in South Charlotte and how many acres they want to bring down. And he's like, but they're building up and multifamily. And so there's going to be trade-offs on different things. So I think as long as we can look at it like, and everybody has to have that same perspective of not that no one's really the enemy. It's what can we do together and do those things together is how I've tried to lead us, which is where we're getting more into growing TreesCharlotte, more into being at the table with and leveraging city council and leveraging our partnerships with the city, because we know that they need us to be there. And then we also have to be supportive and understanding when, affordable housing has to happen for our city with what is it, $430,000 right now for the average home or starter home. So that, like, we have to recognize those things, but hey, if you're doing an affordable housing project, let us come and plant more trees there and help with energy.
Community, a building community at the table too.
I want to be at the table with them too. Yeah, because if that's where it's happening, we can do it responsibly. Like, so the example I usually use, what I'm trying to lead with TreesCharlotte to do is, and with those partnerships is if you're doing 15%, this is why I'm excited about being aligned with planning in Tim Porter's area, because if you're required to put back 15% of trees, bring TreesCharlotte to the table to plant up to the 20 or 25. We can do more together that way. And it's like a carrot versus stick. They're incentivized to get that help to go beyond what's being required. And that's where I think we can really make a difference with all the different players that are at the table.
We probably have time for one or two more questions. The next session I know doesn't start till 10:45, so we'll do one or two more. Who do you want to call? Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mhm.
I'm Vicky Anderson. I have three sustainability jobs. Talk about that later. I'm really excited to see you guys here together because I think
what would be helpful for those of us that are newer to sustainability and those of us even that have been in it for a very long time, is to hear how you're working together, maybe just one project that the three of you have convened together. That would be awesome.
I think it's the project. That I talked about.
Yeah.
So we,
We're breaking some news right here.
we kicked off an initiative called Green Prints, which is an initiative where Soul Nation, CleanAIRE, along with the city, and then there'll be additional partners like TreesCharlotte, Sustain Charlotte, and some others are looking to address and take an EJ lens to the Corridors of Opportunity project. So that project will use the Beatties Ford corridor as well as the Freedom Drive, Wilkinson Drive corridor as kind of test beds. So we kicked off the initiative this past Thursday with probably about 30 community-based organization leaders. We'll have a virtual session coming up on Thursday. But that initiative will probably bring together a number of partners working in conjunction together to address things like remediation and reparation of legacy pollution issues, looking at flood resiliency, tree canopy, creating work plans or workforce development for green technology, creating green districts throughout those communities, and then really engaging community more than anything to hear the issues and the things that they want to solve. So I think, Share Charlotte has been great in terms of bringing the sustainability and the nonprofit communities together. And I anticipate that there's probably 18 of us that kind of get together on a regular basis. So all 18 of those folks, as well as corporations, the city of Charlotte and the county will be working together to kind of really make some things happen that takes advantage of some of the federal money as well as some of the things from Bloomberg cities and those types of initiatives that are coming down. So there's going to be an exciting time in the next 3 years around Charlotte.
All right, we'll do one more question in the back. Yeah.
What would be like your advice on how like policymakers can really like get involved with the community and as well as like deal with controversy from say like people who don't believe in climate change and just a lot of people who don't necessarily think that these things impact them. However, like how do we make them care about the people that it is impacting more heavily now?
Yeah. Well, applaud you for entering into the fray. There's so much work that has to be done. So I'm always glad to hear new folks coming in. I always tell people and quickly personalize it. My neighbor across the street, we sit on different sides of the political spectrum. He just had a granddaughter about 2 years ago, and he asked me why I was leaving corporate America and walking away from tons of money to do environmental stuff. And I said, how do you see your granddaughter growing up in terms of access to clean air and clean water, good, wholesome food sources, and not having to worry about climate or, the next storm that's potentially going to wipe their house off the map? And that resonated with him because he only thought of what his beliefs were. He had no idea what his granddaughter's beliefs would be. So I think you have to personalize the story and bring it home so that they then can start to empathize with the human condition.
All right, I think we're gonna have to wrap it there. Maybe a round of applause for our panel.